Well, hello everyone. I'm Naveen Agarwal, and I'm so excited to welcome all of you again to our weekly live discussion. Now, I have very exciting news to share with you because today we are going to be listening to a conversation I just had with Ed Bills. Now, for all of us who have been very active in the field of medical device risk management, Ed Bills needs no introduction. He is recognized as the leading figure in the risk management process for medical devices because he has been on the ISO committee for 14971 for many years. So I had an opportunity to sit down with Ed Bills last week and talk about the history and evolution of ISO 14971 from his view. So he has been involved with the committee and he has the backstory about the thinking, about the way their approach evolved over these years, and this will be just full of great insights to all of us. Now, before we watch this pre-recorded interview, I want to share with you only a few points of housekeeping. First, this is a public forum, so please do not share any proprietary or business sensitive information. Second, let's stay professional at all times as we engage with each other during our live discussion in the chat. You're welcome to share any comments and insights and questions, but let's be respectful. We are not here to debate or argue. And finally, whatever we discuss today should not be taken as regulatory advice. With that, I want to invite you to just listen to this conversation I had with Ed Bills. It's going to be about 25 minutes or so it'll take most of our time today. But I encourage you to continue sharing your comments and questions in the chat. And good news is that Ed Bills is in the audience today, and he will be able to answer some of your questions if you share in the chat. So let's look into this. Hello, Ed. How are you doing today? Good to see you.
Great to see you again, Naveen.
Looks like you're at a nice beach resort somewhere. Looking at your background, are you having some vacation time?
I was. This is Ogunquit, Maine.
Nice.
Just a few miles from my daughter's house, and I'm going to be up there again next month. So we'll get to visit the beach, I hope.
So I'm glad you got a chance to spend some time with family. And knowing you, I know you are back in action and doing a lot of different things. So Ed, today we really want to talk about your perspective on how the 14971 standard has evolved over the years. You have seen it all. You have been there since the beginning. You have seen it all. And what we would like to really understand is how the thinking and approach to risk management has evolved. So just to get started, Ed, if you could tell us a little bit about your involvement, how you got started with the committee and where it all began.
Actually, one of my fellow engineers at a company I worked at, who was on the IEC 60601 development of the third edition, and they needed somebody on the subcommittee he was working on decontamination. And I was working for a company that had capital products that were rentals, and we would take those out to hospitals and then at the end of the rental period bring them back and decontaminate them. So I had some experience on that. So anyway, when we got into development of the third edition of 60601, it was a standard that was being revised. The third edition came about because the Standards Committee had realized that the second edition was so prescriptive that it didn't address all the new technologies that were coming on board. And this was, I think the second edition was 1989, if I remember right. And that's what got this whole thing started. Is people on the IEC side were looking for something for medical devices that was less prescriptive and more accommodating of new technologies. And so the decision was made to go with a risk management approach. And so as discussions evolved, there was a decision that maybe there's a standard that needs to be developed for risk management. And then they found out along the way that there was a similar discussion going on the ISO side. So those two standards groups, IEC addresses electrical safety standards, and ISO addresses other types of standards. So they were both having a similar discussion. And so they got together and decided that there should be one committee that addressed this issue. And so there was a joint technical committee formed that would address this, and it was put together under the ISO Quality Management Committee. So ISO 210 is the quality management standard for medical products. And among the standards that are there, of course, is 13485, the quality management standard. And then that's in one working group. And we formed a joint working group between IEC and ISO. Now, I was still on the IEC committee when the development started occurring on the first attempt at risk management, and that was ISO 14971-1. And the -1 approach was, okay, we're going to have a document for risk analysis. We're going to have another one, a -2 maybe for risk control, and a -3 for, and so they were going to have all these other documents. And so that got rolling, and it was based upon a European standard that it was coming along called EN 1441. And EN 1441 was an early 90s approach that came along as well. And it was based on FMEA, that they were doing something on risk based upon this standard because it was easier to develop a standard from something that already existed than starting from a clean sheet of paper. And we later found out that the clean sheet of paper approach was probably a better approach.
Yeah. So Ed, let me ask you this very quickly. You mentioned this existing European standard that was the starting point, and FMEA. You mentioned FMEA. So is that one of the reasons why FMEAs are so dominant in our medical? I've always wondered about that.
Well, you know, I just talked about clean sheet of paper approach, and I think that's kind of why we have the thing that we have now is, well, we already had FMEA, and engineers already knew about FMEA because it had been part of their education and training for a long time. So, hey, we'll just adjust this and move it around, and now we can use this as the basis for risk management. And that was a little bit of a problem. FMEA is a reliability standard. It was developed to improve reliability of products and not for product safety. Now, it certainly has some contributions to product safety, because if you can improve reliability and reduce failures, you're going to improve product safety. But it's not totally suited to it because it has different background, different ideas. So when 14971-1 was released, immediately after that release, and it was, I think, 97 or 98, the committee got back together and took some of the ideas they'd been talking about in the -1 development and changed it over and started over again with a document that was going to cover all of risk management. It was going to start at the very beginning and go through the whole product life cycle till the end of to the death of the product, I guess I'd say, in the field.
Right.
So rather than put all these separate documents together with different backgrounds and different approaches and all this, it was a clean sheet of paper approach. Now, we had another person from our company that was on the 14971 committee who I worked with closely because of the 60601 stuff. And he left the company. And my boss came in and said, well, now you're on 14971. So that's how I got assigned to it. And it was an interesting situation. And I was put on the committee right after the release of the first edition.
So what I'm curious to hear from you actually, and this is very important because we know about FMEAs and what challenges they present to us even today when we do risk assessments for ISO 14971. Right. Looking at those years, of course 2000 itself was probably a pretty big leap from where the risk analysis was in 1998 in 14978-1, right? Pretty big leap. How did you guys reconcile this challenge of using FMEAs pretty much exclusively for risk analysis and where you expected them to be from a risk management point of view? What could you give us like a little bit of a peek behind the curtain there?
Well, if you look at the first edition, and I know you have a copy and I do too, there was a section introduced on tools in that first edition, which included more than FMEA. FMEA was not the only tool for risk analysis that was introduced. And there were a number of other tools like fault tree. It also introduced HACCP. HACCP was a tool that FDA was going to introduce into other aspects, and they got it going in pharmaceuticals, and you'll see it in the pharma side. You don't see it on the device side because FDA had a limited pot of money, and the decision was made to develop the quality system inspection technique manual and push off HACCP till later, which never happened because they never got the money for that. So that's why you don't see it, but it's still applicable. It's a great tool because it actually connects very closely to process validation and the whole manufacturing process. It starts out with a hazard analysis, and that term hazard analysis, the only place you see that in 14971 is in HACCP, because the term is not, we're not analyzing hazards in 14971, we're analyzing risk. So the proper term is risk management, risk analysis.
Ed, between 2000, I think this is a very good perspective. Now, it took 7 years after 2000 to come up with the second edition. And during this time frame, did you see some industry practice evolve in a certain way that kind of informed your thinking and approach to risk management in the second edition? Did you notice something happening in the industry or in the regulatory world that kind of really prompted some ideas in your mind about, or the committee's mind about, what should be the second edition like?
Well, let me tell you about the standards development process, because that's what shapes our thinking. And when a standard is released, we have a 5-year period where you go back and look at a standard after 5 years after release, and then you submit to the national committees an opportunity to either reaffirm or revise a standard. And the national committees have that opportunity to vote. And when they ask for revision, they have to submit comments. It's required to submit comments on that. So at the end of our 5-year period, we went out to the national committees. Now this is where it's interesting, because we had to look at IEC and ISO committees, both. And all of those committees voted on reaffirming or revising the standard. And then they had to submit all these comments. and we got a pile of comments. And basically, the comments all said, we need more information. We need more guidance. Don't revise the process.
I see.
So the steps in the process, if you look back at the 2000 edition and compare that to the third edition, the steps are the same.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. So looking at it from outside as a practitioner, to me, it seemed like 2007 was the time when that edition really started teaching us how to do risk management in a way that would be very consistent, very compliant, and also easy. Like, it started explaining concepts for the first time in my mind. I don't see that as much in the 2000 edition. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, the 2000 was get it out there and let's get this thing started. And then we can get the comments back from everybody about what we need to do different. And it wasn't what we need to do different. It's how do we do these things that you told us to do?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's where the supplementary guidance came in, which was added on to the end of the standard, which became a point of confusion.
How so? How so? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, because they look with the 2007 edition, everything's in the standard, so it must all be requirements.
Oh, so normative versus informative difference.
Yes. People didn't understand that only the numbered clauses in the standard were requirements. All of the alphabetic annexes were information on how to implement those numbered clauses.
And I think that they introduced the concept of P1, P2 and wrote about hazardous situations, sequence of events in an effort to clarify how harm occurs. And I feel like people just ran with it. What was your experience in terms of the practice of risk management, how it changed after 2007 with this P1, P2?
Well, you're right with the P1, P2. That topic was placed into the guidance to explain a question that came up. Why is the probability of occurrence of a hazard different from the probability of occurrence of a harm? So they were trying to apply FMEA, the probability of occurrence of a failure, to a harm occurring, and that's not always the case.
Right.
You have to look at the exposure of the hazard in such a way that harm can occur, and that's the hazardous situation that sits in between the hazard and the harm. So we were trying to explain why that difference is there, and it was purely an informative explanation. No requirements for P1, P2. Nope, didn't have to do it. And it still remains the same today.
So what I'm curious to understand is that it was definitely the right move to provide more guidance in 2007. No doubt about that. It was the right thing to do, and I think it established sort of a basic knowledge, a body of knowledge for risk management. I think it did that very, very effectively. The practice of that between 2007 and 2019, when the third edition was released, I believe went through a lot of different points of confusion like you were mentioning. So I'm curious to hear, and of course there was 2012 EU harmonization and Z annexes in EU and a lot of conversation about risk acceptability. We know all that, right? How did this inform? So let's walk from 2007 to 2019. Of course, 5-year period that someone has to now take a look at it after 5 years. I'm curious to hear the story now. What happened? Because industry is going through kind of a churn on risk management, I believe, based on all this body of knowledge being released and not, there's guidance, but still practice is hard. So what is going on here in the industry at the time and how it's informing your thinking in the committee? I'll be very curious to hear about that.
Well, I'm going to go back to the first edition.
Okay.
And there's something in the risk management policy called ALARP.
Yeah.
That was put into the standard at the insistence of Europe.
Okay.
Europe required us to put that in there.
Okay.
And it's in the guidance. It's not in the requirements.
That's right. Okay. Absolutely correct.
And there's different risk management policies. There's all kinds of things. that was misconstrued by industry quite a bit. And that's what caused Europe a problem, because industry said, well, if it costs too much, we don't have to do it. No, that's not exactly right. The 2013 TR was pointedly written to counter some of the ideas that were in the 2012 EN version, because they had misunderstood the difference between information for safety and disclosure of residual risk.
Sure.
And that's why they said you couldn't use information for safety as a risk control. No, that's wrong. Totally wrong. Because they didn't understand that residual risk happens after your risk controls are implemented, after you've used information for safety. So that was a problem. The ALR problem. So we tried to explain in the 2013 document some of those differences. So we couldn't tell Europe, no, you're wrong.
Right.
But we further explained the terminology. So there's comments on information for safety and on residual risk and what the differences are.
Fascinating, Ed. I think what is amazing to me is really the change in thinking, the approach. One specific question I have for you is in 2019 third edition, clause 10, which is post-market, is really, really big in the sense that it's needed. And I know you had a lot of contribution to that. So what influenced your thinking between this time period from 2007 to 2019 that said, no guys, we have to pay a little bit more attention to post-market? What happened in the industry, in the regulatory environment? Can you share some kind of insight into that?
When we did the 2007 then, it was the title for clause 9 was expanded to production and post-production information.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So to show that we're covering the entire life cycle of the product, everything.
Correct.
Okay. So now, as we started moving forward, and we met in Tampa in 2016 to kick this all off, we got the comments from ISO and IEC. We had our first meeting. We looked at all of these issues that we had to address. And one of the issues we had to address was something called the MDR that was developed in Europe.
Yes.
And so we brought that in and we looked at it and said, gosh, there's a whole lot of requirements here for post-market. And companies haven't been doing post-market.
Yeah.
They've been looking at, okay, when the phone rings, we got a complaint, we'll write that down. Okay. And that was the extent of post-market.
Yeah.
You know, now there was a document that occurred. It was the GHTF CAPA guidance.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Which expanded that whole concept a great deal. And that was the document that was used as the input to 13485 clause 8, the revisions that occurred there, and us. Both of us together looked at that and said, look at all the post-market stuff that's in this CAPA guidance document. And that also drove the MDR.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got all this emphasis now on post-market coming our way, and we've got to do something. So we formed a sub-team. And so I was on the team that did post-market. And Mark Lineback, who was with UL at the time, was our leader and did a really great job. It's the biggest change in the third edition is the post-market.
For sure. And right, so Ed, this is fascinating to me, and I'm just curious to hear from your view where it's all headed now.
Well, it's closer than we think, because it's 2024, the next vote that will come up. Now, each of your viewers should know that they have the opportunity to comment on the questions that they have about the standard and recommend changes, and they can do that with their national committee when they request comments. Now, I'm seeing a few things, but largely it continues to be we need more information about how to do some of this stuff.
This is fascinating, Ed. I think this was just beautiful perspective of how things have changed and where they might be going and how all of us can get involved, which is what I would encourage everybody listening to this presentation today, is just get involved. and get your voice heard. We live in the world of technology, right? We can share ideas, exchange information with each other, and influence our thinking collectively if we are so passionate about that. So Ed, I wanted to actually give you just a few final words of wisdom to share, because I'm very curious from your perspective. Like, if, let's say, someone is just starting out their career in the medical industry, or they aspire to really become an expert in risk management, what kind of advice or suggestions you would have for them?
Well, I'll give you, first of all, my experience is that I learned about risk management by being on the committee. Okay. I tell people, I don't know everything about risk management, but I got the phone numbers of the people that do. Mm-hmm. So I got the contact information for all the committee members that I've served with. And if I've got a question, I'll ask them. Mm-hmm. And I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I'll see if I can find the answer. My recommendation was to expand your contacts. Mm-hmm. Try to get to know people that are more of an expert than you are, and I'm still trying to do that.
Great, that's just excellent advice and excellent pieces of information that all of us can benefit from. And I want to thank you again for your time. This has been so insightful personally for me to learn the history of evolution, how things have changed. And it's up to us, like you are saying, just to recap, it's up to us to contribute to this, contribute to the body of knowledge, expand our network, share information, and have a conversation about this. Ed, do you have any final closing comments and thoughts for us in the industry?
Well, I like your comment on sharing information, Naveen. You've done a lot to help us share information with your different sessions you've been running. And I think that's a valuable contribution. And I continue to accept questions that come from people on my LinkedIn account. Mm-hmm. We just try our best to help people, because after all, what we have to go back and remember is what we're all about is the patient. Mm-hmm. Okay. I start my training classes with a picture of a guy laying in bed connected up to about 29 different devices and saying, you got to remember what the focus is here. We're not just to create documents for file, but it's about this person and making their life better.
That is awesome. That's just wonderful reminder of why we do this, right? Why we put so much effort. All of us work very hard in the industry, and why we should continue to do this, even though it is not sometimes easy. And certainly you have led by example in your career. You have done these things hands-on. You have participated in these committees. You have trained so many people. You have mentored and coached so many people, including me. And anytime, I have a question, I can reach out to you. And that's exactly what you are advising us to do, all of us. Let's not be afraid that we are all in it together with the same patient focus. That's what we are doing it for. And if we do it right, we'll all advance the field collectively. So yeah, this really touches my heart, because it resonates with me. And I believe there are so many people in the industry who are driven by such ideas and passions. And I invite everybody, right, to engage. Reach out to Ed anytime. You are on LinkedIn, very active still, and training and traveling everywhere. Make connections, make new connections. So Ed, with that, I really want to thank you again for your time. This has been just very, very insightful. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts so freely. So I really thank you.
Well, thank you, Naveen, for the opportunity. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I've had the opportunity to watch this conversation multiple times before our live discussion today. So let me tell you that there's a lot packed in there. So I encourage you to again watch the recorded version that I will be posting very soon. Share it with colleagues and continue the conversation on LinkedIn. Before we go, I would like to issue a call to action. As we heard from Ed, it is very important for all of us to get involved, get engaged, share information, and together collectively enhance and influence the direction of our industry as far as risk management is concerned. So I invite you to continue to participate in these weekly live discussions. And if you would like to connect with me one-on-one, send me a message on LinkedIn. If you have any ideas or suggestions for improvement to improve our collaboration through these forums, I would be very happy to talk to you. And did you also know that you can schedule a 15-minute conversation with me anytime based on your convenience? I can provide more information to you about scheduling these 15-minute quick chats. I look forward to connecting with you. So thank you again for joining today, and let's talk next week.